Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marshall here at Stony Lane. I want to talk to you today because I know that you and your class are working on writing stories that you're making up about characters that you didn't make up, characters that are from real books that you've read and you've loved. Okay, and so I want to teach you a little bit about how that works because today I'm going to do that. I'm going to write a story about characters that I know and love. I'm going to show you a book that's from my favorite series to read. Let's take a look at it. So this is a book called George and Martha, and it's from a series called George and Martha, and it's written by an author named James Marshall. That's not me. He just has my name. George and Martha. Okay, and George and Martha is a really funny series that I love reading because they just do funny stuff. I'm not going to read you this book right now, but if you want to hear the book, you can go to this link. It's tinyurl.com slash Mr. Marshall without a period, MR Marshall GM, George and Martha. Okay. And I already did a read aloud there that you can hear this book and some of the things that I was thinking about while I was reading that book. Okay. So here it is again, tinyurl.com slash Mr. Marshall GM. And if you need to just like stop watching this video so you can watch that one, do that and then come back when you're done watching. But if you already know George and Martha, you can just keep watching this video. Okay? So here we go. So one of the things that I know about George and Martha, because I've read George and Martha a lot, is that George and Martha, let's see, teach each other lessons, like life lessons. Okay. I'm thinking of stuff that I know about George and Martha because that's going to help me write. I know that George and Martha um, can be silly. George and Martha are silly. What else do I know about George and Martha? I know that George and Martha, hmm, they, George and Martha get into silly problems, and that's like how they learn. Okay? They get into silly problems, usually around the house, but sometimes in other places too. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking what I know about George and Martha and I'm using that information to think, well, what kind of story could I tell about them? A new story. What kind of new problem could they have that maybe wasn't in a book? And I'm going to tell that story. Okay, so let me think. What do I want to say about them? George and Martha teach each other lessons. George and Martha can be silly. George and Martha get into silly problems. So, oh, I also know that George and Martha care about each other. Okay, so I think I'm going to tell a story where the biggest thing is that they teach each other a lesson. Okay, so I'm trying to think, well, what kind of problem could they have where George and Martha teach each other a lesson? Let me see. Well, I think, you know, they don't get into these big problems like they go up to outer space and they have to fight aliens. They don't get into problems like they have homework. It's not like that. It's just stuff around the house. And so I know George George eats too much candy and he's got to learn not to eat too much candy because it'll make his tummy hurt. Okay, so why don't I tell a story about that? So I'm going to make my writing paper. Maybe your teacher has writing paper for you and you can choose the writing paper that works best for you and makes you feel strong like a writer. My paper is going to have a box for some pictures and some lines for some words. Okay. Your paper might look different. That's okay, whatever. So let's see. In my box for page one, let's see. I'm going to draw George. And when you draw, it doesn't have to look perfect. That's George. And there's a table that has a candy jar on it. And so the words are going to say George ate candy. George ate candy. He ate lots of candy. He ate lots of candy. And you know what else happens in these books? Is Martha's always somewhere watching. So I'm going to draw Martha. She has a flower in her hair all the time. But George doesn't see that Martha's watching. Okay? So I'm going to write Martha. Martha saw this. She shook her head, right? Because Martha's always acting like a mother. And she's going, right? George ate candy. He ate lots of candy. Martha saw this. She shook her head. Okay, so that's the beginning of my story. So let's go to the next part of my story. Let's go to the middle of my story. And in the middle of my story, I'm going to make my paper again. Have a box for a picture and some lines for some words. Okay, here we go. So now I know the next thing that happens is that George's tummy is going to hurt. So I'm going to draw George. And now his tummy hurts. That's not a great picture, but let's see how that goes. George's tummy hurt because he ate so much candy. George's tummy hurt because he ate so much candy. Okay, so now for my last page, I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to write. I'm not going to write because you can kind of get what I'm doing. So on the last page, I'm going to draw George and Martha talking together, and the words are going to say, "You shouldn't eat so much candy," said Martha. "I know," said George. Martha said instead, now she's going to give some silly advice. "You should eat rutabaga because that doesn't make your tummy hurt." "Okay," said George. And that's the end. See how I did that? You see what I did? You see how I took stuff that I knew about George and Martha, about how they teach each other lessons, how they can be silly, they get into silly problems, and they care about each other. I also remembered that Martha sometimes gives silly advice, right? And I use that to write my own story. So now you try that. You try that with your characters from your book. Don't do George and Martha unless you love George and Martha too, right? Think of a character from a series that you know and love, that you've read a whole lot, and think about what you know about that character and use that to get an idea for a story and then go write the story and enjoy it. Okay? I'll see you next time.